Executive order abuse must end. After learning of the four-nation special status, were El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Haiti, where one executive order after another placed hundreds of thousands in purgatory of every 18 months, wondering if their lives will be upturned, all to allow Congress to avoid doing anything that might endanger their election by doing their jobs, must not be allowed to continue. Quietly, 3 presidents signed executive orders that created a DACA mess that today forces those in Washington to finally tell America the truth. Only because one president, President Donald Trump, for whatever reason he had, refused to break his oath and sign these laws. These laws allowed Democrats in Washington to yell racism to their base, while allowing Republicans in Washington to yell, "This is about following the law," to theirs. Both sides know as well as I do that executive orders have the force of law while president is in office. In short, these victims have been in the shadows, never allowed even a path to citizenship. At the same time, our so-called leaders divided this nation with lies, and the so-called free press silently said nothing. This has gone on long enough. We have 3, maybe 7 years. After Trump leaves, these 2 parties can go back to business as usual. They have fixed it so they have all the advantages in the elections. Democrats already created a superdelegate subgroup to end any chance their party will have a candidate Washington doesn't want. Only Republicans have not. That is how Trump won. Remember that, because Republicans in Washington will close that loophole if we fail to address this before Trump leaves office. This information I found on Wikipedia. How accurate it is, I don't know. In the United States, an executive order is a directive issued by the President of the United States that manages operations of the federal government and have the force of law. The legal or constitutional basis for executive orders has multiple sources. Article 2 of the United States Constitution gives the President broad executive enforcement authority to use their discretion to determine how to enforce the law or to otherwise manage the resources and staff of the executive branch. The ability to make such orders is also based on express or implied acts of Congress that delegate to the President some degree of discretionary power. Like both legislative statutes and regulations promulgated by government agencies, executive orders are subject to judicial review and may be overturned if the orders lack support by statute or the Constitution. Major policy initiatives require approval by the legislative branch, but executive orders have significant influence over the internal affairs of government, deciding how and to what degree legislation will be enforced, dealing with emergencies, waging wars, and in general, fine-tuning policy choices in the implementation of broad statutes. There's some part of the executive order that I cut off of the WikiLeaks. But anyway, Franklyn Rosevelt. Prior to 1932, uncontested executive orders had determined such issues as national mourning on the death of a president and the lowering of flags to half-staff. President Franklyn Roosevelt issued the first of the 3,522 executive orders on March 6, 1933, declaring a bank holiday. In 1934, while Charles Evans Hughes was Chief Justice of the United States, the court found that the National Industrial Recovery Act was unconstitutional. President Roosevelt then issued a new one, citing the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act of 1935 and reestablishing the National Emergency Council to administer the functions of NIRA and carrying out the provisions of the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act. And on June 15, he issued an executive order which terminated NIRA and replaced it with the Office of Administration of the National Recovery Administration. In the years that followed, President Roosevelt replaced the outgoing justices with those more in line with his views. and only George Washington had equal or greater influence over the Supreme Court appointments, choosing all of its original members. Congress must place limits. They did using the Executive War Powers Act, and although presidents do disagree, it still stands. Only Congress can offer a path to citizenship by allowing this to continue. The presidents clearly hoped pressure would increase, finally forcing Congress to grant citizenship, something that citizens would not have agreed to at the time. Today, these victims of our government's so-called kindness should get a path. I'm sorry, but they should waive the right to sponsor others. This was wrong after all. However, these individuals suffered enough at the hands of these three presidents. So-called compassion. This is a constitutional democracy, and Congress represents the states. The president should not have the powers of a dictator, increasing pressure through these types of tactics to gain their goals. If Congress will not deal with executive orders that involve immigration or war in a certain time period, at least 18 months, then they alone deserve the blame. If they lack the courage to follow their conscience, they should not be in public office. Face the voters and do what you were elected to do. Don't blame presidents for refusing to cover you from doing the right thing.